Yeah, and the more you subscribe, the more support you give, the fancier we're going to get with this stuff, and the more opportunities we're going to have, like this cool graphic that I spent time making, and to talk about the five worst blunders during Street Fighter 4's life. That's what I wanted to discuss this week. And there were a handful. We often look back at Street Fighter 4 with, as you like to say, the rose-colored glasses, because, and that tends to happen in every new iteration. A Street Fighter game comes out and everything sucks and everything used to be great. But if you go back to the time and you remember, oh, it was that exact same scenario, but it was for the current game of the time. And in Street Fighter 4's case, oh, it used to be great when it was Third Strike, things like that. So don't get me wrong, Street Fighter 4 is the game that got me into this competitively. I love it. It's my favorite Street Fighter game for all intents and purposes. I have a ton of fond memories with it, but I want to pick apart some of the worst times, and this is both within the game and kind of without. So, without any further ado, the first one here is Vortex, and that's also Vortex with the combination of option selects, and I would even say unblockables. Those would be the icing on top. They weren't as prevalent, so I'm not really going to go into much detail about them, but the fact that they existed, you just don't want unblockables in your game, and they were around for pretty much all of Street Fighter 4. They were attended to a little bit, and they weren't a huge deal, but the fact that they were there at all is not a good look. But specifically Vortex. In Street Fighter V, we took a lot of issue with robbery V-triggers, and Vortex was, for those that didn't play 4, kind of the robbery aspect in Street Fighter 4. A Vortex is essentially, you get a knockdown, and then you have an Oki situation that if you are successful, it's going to knock the opponent back down into the same exact sort of situation, and you rinse and repeat. So what it could end up being is you get a knockdown, and then that's the end of the game because you just keep hitting them and knocking them down over and over and over again. And when that's too easy to do, you're sort of taking away the rest of the game and the rest of the experience. You don't go back to neutral. You don't go back to other risk and reward. Now, you pepper in the fact that Street Fighter 4 was so option select heavy, meaning that you could input a couple of different potential sequences, and then depending on what your opponent did, the game would essentially select the best one for you.
Yeah.
That just made it so much better. And another way of saying that would be, say there were 3 possible ways of trying to defend when you're waking up from after Akuma sweeps you. Akuma could input a sequence that would cover 2 of those options, regardless of. So if you did 2 of those options, he was going to hit you, and you'd be right back into that same scenario. And it actually was so bad with certain matchups, Akuma being one of the biggest transgressors here, that back in, I think it was Super Street Fighter 4, if Abel got knocked down by Akuma, it was essentially just on the Akuma player's execution. They could end the round then. Abel, if they did the Vortex correctly, Abel was never getting out of it. And they did some things to attend to this, but it was just not a good look for the game. And I remember feeling in the competitive crowd, especially playing at things like Wednesday night fights and traveling and such, so much of the conversation was, when are we getting rid of this BS? Because it's just too much. It's taking away the fun. It's like, sure, it's extremely effective, but this is not the game that we want to play. And then Capcom eventually attended to it. I would say more than a band-aid, but not quite a fix. When they added delayed wake up, because that essentially, just like V-Shift, added another layer to the mind games. So there were still vortexy option selects that you could do, where you calculated the delayed wake up, and if they did a delayed wake up, they'd be right back in the thick of it. But
Yeah.
you had to guess whether they were going to get up quickly or not, and that at least gave the defender one more layer, one more option for getting out of this. To give you also an idea of how egregious this was, man, they built Street Fighter V specifically around not having these things in it, and I think that says a lot.
Yeah, it's I compare it to entering the Konami code, for Contra, up, down, left, right, left, right. If I do the code correctly, I get 30 lives and you're stuck with 3, and how is that fair? And it's fighting games are all about the reads. They're all about, and option selects basically take, a bunch of the reads off the table, and it doesn't matter what your opponent does because the game is basically playing itself if you enter the Konami code. And I
Yeah.
hate that. That's in a lot of people when option select started to come out in Street Fighter 4 on, it was mostly in our comments because Twitter hadn't really blown up at that point. But a lot of people in our comments were like, I hate this. Like it goes against the fundamental concept of what a fighting game should be. But, option selects have been there from, day one pretty much in fighting games. It's just what level in Street Fighter 4 took it to a whole different level for a lot of people.
Option select fighter 4. Yeah. Okay, so the next thing is AE Yun. When Yun and Yang came out for Arcade Edition, it was, I guess, for all intents and purposes, the third version of Street Fighter 4. And I mean, Yang, he might have been really good. I don't really remember because he was still in the shadow of his brother Yun, who had just absolutely everything when it came to offense and neutral and ability. He was like, we're worried about pay to win characters, especially like in Mortal Kombat X, and we're fearful of that being a thing in modern fighting games. This was 150% just that. He had dive kicks that he could do like almost not off the ground at all, and on the kind of pressure that those would lead to on wake up, because you had to like left right decide where he was going to be, and he could do it like right on top of your head. If he hits you, it's into a ton of damage, and you guessed it, right back into those same situations. If you were blocking too much, he had a command grab that would give him access to exactly the same kind of strings that he would get if he hit you with a dive kick. He built meter like crazy. And that's not even his worst stuff. I think one of the biggest things that people remember was his EX rush punch was +1 on block. So hey, if he hits you, great, he's getting damage and he's right up in your face. By the way, this goes almost full screen. But if it didn't hit you, he was +1 in your face, and now he gets to play his Yun pressure games, which is exactly what he wanted. His damage output, especially with Ganasian, was insane. And as soon as AE Yun came out, like a ton of pros and their moms picked him up and were just destroying and laughing, and not laughing at like the losers, laughing at how ridiculous it felt. I remember Daigo winning Revelations back in LA at one point, right when AE Yun had come out. And it was just goofy. There was a couple of Yuns, and every time they popped up on the screen, it was just like, oh yeah, here it goes, and here's the goofy stuff again. And oh, I'm not surprised that insert anybody, the biggest scrub or Momochi, was going to get hit by this stuff because it was so damn powerful. And then a few months later, they updated the game and removed a lot of what he had, and he was still arguably, people still considered him possibly one of the best, possibly the best character in the game. But that just goes to show they took a lot away from him because they had to, and he was still really good. But again, it's one thing to have your character be overpowered, especially if he's a new, or he or she is a newcomer into your roster. But Ono went on the record of saying, "Oh, we did this on purpose." And that hits a whole other way when the developer says, we did this on purpose. We basically put the game in suspension. We took the competitive aspect of the game and we suspended it so that we could have this character that people would have, I guess, fun limitedly, a limited amount of fun just destroying other people with. But eventually that just gets lame because it's not even a contest. And I have a quote here. This isn't a direct quote; it's a translation from a Famitsu article that I no longer can find. But this is the gist of what he had said via that translations from one of our older articles. He says, the home version of Super Street Fighter 4 was made with extremely good balance. Questionable. The balance was done in such a way that there's no one overly powerful character. And then he goes on. Arcade Edition, on the other hand, has some characters who were purposefully made strong. The reason this was done is because Ono feels that having such a character helps to build community and competitive spirit. It did the opposite of that. I don't even know if he truly believed that was the case. I don't understand exactly why they did this, except for to make like, oh, you could come and play this game and win really easily, which is that's my only explanation.
It's creating the villain. It's like, okay, there's a villain character. Anyone who plays Yun is a villain character. And the top 24 of Evo in 2011, there were 5 Yuns in there, and that is, it's bad. And like, in the top 8 there were 2. It's like it was. Ugh. It's the villain, angle. And actually at the time, I remember Seth Killian had to go on because Capcom, I believe it's still their philosophy, but we'll see. They like all their people who do interviews and other stuff to have the same kind of public messaging, right?
Sure.
And Seth is stuck up there, poor guy. And they're like, hey, Ono's saying that he made Yun, balanced badly, right? Like he's just really good. They're like, do you agree with that? And it's like Seth like paused for like 2 seconds, and he's like, well, this is what we did.
I plead the fifth. I'm not allowed to say the truth right now.
Yeah, it was, and again, that was a directive handed out by Capcom, so he's trying to follow it. That he's doing his job at that point. If your boss asks you to do something, you've got to do it, right? But he was like, he was really torn on the like, oh man, I can't give a good answer on this one, and it was just kind of like, yeah, he was stuck, and it was just one of the most mind blowing. What are you doing, Capcom?
Yeah. So the next one up here, I might even let you just take over for this one because we talked about this a handful of times, and I know you have some reactions to it. But this is the Decapre reveal. Decapre was the 44th and final character to be released into the game. Street Fighter 4 was doing really well. Ultra comes out. Let's back up a little bit. Ultra is announced, and we know that who is it? Hugo, Elena, Poison, and help me, Rolento were on the way, and then there was one more mystery character who would be the final character released into the game, and we didn't know who it was, but there was a bunch of playing around and messaging surrounding who this mysterious final character was. We were also going to get, as I said, delayed wake up, and they were putting in red focus. The game was changing, and people were still very happy to play the game. So it had decent momentum, but this was going to fix the problems that they did have, things like Vortex and unblockables and stuff like that. Plus, give you new characters, and then there's this mystery. And it was, I think, 8 months between the time that we first heard that a new character was coming, and then we actually got the reveal. And in that 8 months, there was a ton of speculation, a ton of like, ooh, could it be this? And Ono and Capcom put out some hints and said things like they've never been a playable character in Street Fighter before, and nobody is guessing it. I think Ono went on record saying only like 4 people have guessed it right. And there was a ton of people speculating things like the dolls, Decapre. Point is, that wasn't very true. And it felt like the way that Ono's messaging was, we were like, well, could it be Decapre? And he was just like, no. No. But when it actually was revealed, it was like, we all wanted to be hype. I remember being there at final round, I think it was 14, where after top 8, they had a Combo Fiend, and I think Ryan Hart won the whole thing, so they brought it up, and they did the whole alpha kind of reveal where it looked like Armiko is it, and then Bison hits her way, and eventually it's Decapre that's revealed, and they played a set, and they talked about her a little bit, and they handed out shirts, and we're like, cool, it's a new character, and she's got these cool blades and stuff and whatnot, but we were distracted by the fact that it's like, we were pretty sure it wasn't this character, and this looks a lot like a Cammy clone, and like people did not like it's people didn't like Cammy, by the way, even back in Street Fighter 4. She was really good then too. And it fell relatively flat for being this 8-month buildup. We figured we didn't know who it was going to be because we were like, we've explored every corner, and the messaging doesn't line up to any of this. So we're totally stumped. Oh no, it turns out you did know who it was. We just said it wasn't that. And it just fell flat. And like Decapre was fine. It was okay. But the buildup and also the kind of communication that Ono had versus the actual release, it just left a bad taste in people's mouths. It was a total.
Yeah, you can't just outright lie to your fans, and Ono had some moments where he clearly did that, and Decapre was one of them. It was you can hint, you can kind of mislead a little bit, you can do a few things there, but you really want to stop short of outright lying to people about what's going to happen, because no one likes being lied to. It's a bad look for a game, and it pisses people off. I actually liked Decapre. I played her a good bit, and I thought the players who put time into her, like Knuckle Dew and others, like she was a really interesting character, but just her start was terrible, and an exact example of how not to do things if you're going to announce a fighting
poor
game character.
PR. That's what this one comes down to, is really poorly handled PR. There's actually a quote from Ono I have here. He and Ayano, I believe it was, were talking, and I think it was a Thai interview. Doesn't really matter. Anyways, he said, when released, and this is before we knew who she was, when released, she'd likely be a bit of a nuisance. In fact, when we finally reveal who she is, at least initially, probably nobody will be happy about it.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna leave that there. That's the
Yeah.
thing that Ono said leading up to DiCaprio.
Yeah.
All right. Next one on the list here, the transition to PlayStation 4. Believe it or not, back in the day, PlayStation 4 was a brand new, the fancy pants, state of the art thing. And Street Fighter 4 had been primarily played on 360, and it was also on PS3, but PS3, Sony's hardware was crappy back then too, and it was widely accepted as not as good on PlayStation. The years that we played it at Evo, people had that option select ready. It's like, oh, PlayStation. That's why I wasn't able to do my things and stuff like that. But when it was Ultra Street Fighter 4, so we had still a really good bit of momentum because DiCaprio and such, they didn't kill the game or anything like that. It just really wasn't a great moment for it. But people were still excited to play. We had a game that we loved, and then we had this version of the game where it felt like so many of the things were updated to the way we want it. We had the game we really wanted to play, and people were having a really good time doing it. Now this game was going to be ported over to the state of the art technology, PlayStation 4. It's going to look that much nicer. It's going to run that much smoother. It's going to be that much better. And when it actually came out, it had a ton of bugs. It had like Guile's sonic booms didn't really manifest on screen. They were just kind of like these blank, like they look like Predator. You know, when Predator goes into cloak mode and it's just sort of like a warped view of the things behind him. That's what his sonic booms look like. We'll put some footage of all this stuff up there. I remember there was some like in training mode or in like the trials mode, the game would just bug out and start like just hopping around and being all weird looking and stuff. The menus were slower. There was more input delay reported. Dudley made the sounds of, I think it was Mecha Zangief, because when Mecha Zangief would dash and stuff, you could hear like the metal clanging around. Dudley, for some reason, did that in his bulldog costume. It was just a big hunk of crap that no one apparently inspected. There was like no quality assurance. And when I was looking this up, there's a PlayStation blog entry where Sony teamed up with Other Ocean I'll just read you the quote here. This is Sony speaking. The amazing team at Other Ocean Interactive is putting the final touches on this fantastic version of the Capcom classic. I'd love to get it to you sooner, but honestly, we're playing it too much, so you'll have to wait. And then they gave us this. So they had this like cavalier attitude. It's like, oh, we're just having so much fun. We can't even hit our deadlines. I mean, they didn't miss a deadline or anything like that. But they had this cavalier, like, this is so good and we're playing it a lot. And it's like, obviously you weren't playing it a lot because it's got so many egregious errors when it's supposed to be the nicest, shiniest, smoothest version. And instead it looks like, some off store brand version of the game that someone kind of like threw together without much care and love. And so this was a moment where it was supposed to be that this was going to get played at Evo. We were going to have it on PS4. Guess what? Wizard was like, no, we're going back to 360 unless they can fix their stuff in time, which they didn't. And we played Street Fighter 4 that year for its final year in 2015 on 360 instead of the latest and greatest version, PlayStation 4. But it was, again, setting up big expectations and then just absolutely failing to deliver.
Yeah, it's not like Sony consoles would ever have issues with input delay, John.
Are you looking at the camera?
Maybe are you accusing me of looking at the camera? I never do that. But anyway,
No.
it's the input delay issues got fixed actually by a community member who asked me to remain nameless, but shout outs to them if they're watching this. And the PlayStation 4 port ended up actually in a really good spot with time. It took a little bit for them to get there though. And graphically it was better. I think the 360 and PlayStation 3 versions ran at 720p and the PS4 version was at 1080p. So you got to see, a higher fidelity. A lot of things were very nice about it actually. It was a good port once they patched the hell out of it.
Yeah, initially, it eventually got where it needed to go.
Yeah, but it took a little bit, and but man, those problems on Sony consoles, man, it always seems to come back to the same stuff, and that's what's really frustrating to me. Is like if you have the same problems over and over and over again, it's like what the heck? And I still think like even the PlayStation 5 is going to have issues with input delay, but that's a story for another time. But yeah, so
Very well
can't have
might,
nice
huh?
things in the FGC, John. Can't have nice things. So.
All right, last one here is Elena. Elena comes out, part of Ultra, the whole Ultra package too. Elena comes out at the same time as DiCapri. Elena changed the way the game was played. In some people regard her as an absolute top tier. I don't know so much. She was a top tier pocket character, and it felt like everybody had a pocket Elena, especially in the pros. I remember watching Evo, and actually I went back and looked at the numbers, and there weren't a ton of Elenas, but there were three in the top eight as pocket characters: Gamer Bee, Infiltration, and I think Momochi busted her out too at one point. Um, the thing about Elena was that she turned the game widely into something that most people didn't enjoy playing. I looked up Bathael's videos, both for AE Yun and Elena. He has some awesome breakdown videos. They're about 25-ish minutes each, where he just goes through why these characters were so broken, and I highly recommend them. I'll leave a link. But she had so many things. The thing that people remember the most is that she could heal. So
Mhm.
Elena's would be terrible for zoning characters because she would just absorb their projectiles, get ultra, and then as soon as she got any kind of knockdown or was just far enough away from them, she'd heal her life right back. And that was a big thing that like kind of made the pacing of rounds go for forever, and it wasn't the greatest to watch. It was fun, but you were kind of laughing at the game as opposed to like, along with it, laughing at how absurd some of these situations were. But a lot of the things she did, like when she did her sweep, for instance, and I think a few different moves, her hurt boxes would be really wonky and they would be lowered. And so when you would go to punish, she would be in this weird animation where she'd like low profile, or your moves would whiff when it wouldn't happen against anybody else. Like Fei Long could try to punish her sweep, for instance, and the first ultra, I'm sorry, with his ultra, and the first Rekka of his ultra would whiff, and then by the time the second one came out, she was able to block, and that kind of stuff would happen all the time. So not only was she an incredibly frustrating character to fight in the neutral because her reach was insane and her options that we'll get into were really good and very difficult to even begin to try to deal with. It was just like 50-50s for days is what it felt like from the neutral. Not only was that there, but then when you finally did get the opportunity to try to hit her, she would have some weird hurt box interaction where you'd whiff and then you'd end up like, whiffing a DP or getting hit yourself because you tried to go for a punish. She changed the game in so many ways. And like, so some of the things she could do was like, the move I call breakdance fighting. I think it's Link's Tail, where she would kind of spin around on the ground and
Yeah.
kind of do some Eddie Gordo kicks. That was -7. It was very punishable. But if she did the light version, she'd do one revolution. If she did the medium version, and you couldn't really tell except for the fact that she did more revolutions of it, she would do two. And then the heavy version, she would do three. If you tried to punish thinking it was the light version and that she was -7 and she did a heavier version, the next revolution would come out and hit you. And so you kind of had to guess which strength she did or just keep blocking. And so she would get away with a ton. Her overheads were crazy fast, reached really far, and then could do things like combo. They were ridiculously safe, sometimes just because of frame data, other times because of just the weird spacing and interactions. Again, those hurt boxes kind of things. She just turned the game into this weird frustration fest that ultimately I think she would have been updated and changed had they not rushed Street
Yeah.
Fighter 5 out shortly thereafter. But at the end, it just felt like Elena was a very obvious problem, especially at that Evo top 8. And I think the only reason that they didn't change her is because the game was kind of done with at that point and everybody was moved on to the Street Fighter 5 development and such. So,
Yeah, one of the main things that jumps out with me, Elena, is we posted a meme graphic. Hopefully, I can find it because it was many years ago. But a player had their joystick on the screen, and every button was replaced with like a light punch or light kick. I forget what. I think it was crouching
it
light
was
punch.
light punch, but
Yeah,
it was a
a
kick and it
kick.
looked like
Yeah,
a low, so you'd always block low, even though you didn't have to. This is another one of Raphael's points that I noted. And so you would block everything low, thinking you needed to, and then that would open up her overhead game in a fairly dishonest way. But go
yeah.
ahead.
But well, you just replaced all the buttons with just crouching light punch. That's all you needed with Elena, and then healing, right? And it was a great meme. And for people who don't quite understand this, take Rashid's crouching light kick, what you see at the very end of rounds in Street Fighter V a lot. Just to chip someone out, like do the last bit of damage, I should say. Well, Elena could do that all throughout the match, and I think that thing, had to be like plus on block and a few other things, and it just had a great hitbox on it, wonky hitbox, and I mean, it was just like I can use this button all throughout the match, and there's not a lot you can do about it. And it was like, okay, so yeah, mapping every single button to that might as
Yeah.
well. Yeah,
It was
it
three
wasn't too bad.
frames and it went forever far away. And so she could punish a ton of moves that were not normally punishable because of just the spacing. She could punish them. And so then that was another thing. Like, oh, remember all of this muscle memory that you have where like if you're Fei Long, if you space a Rekka from this far away and they block it, you're still, nope, not anymore, not with Elena. There's a bunch of moves like that. And get this, she could do, and this was kind of a problem in Street Fighter 4 generally, because the lights were, you could link so many lights together. She could do 4 of them, up to 4 of them. And then if any of them hit, go into some of her BS and whatnot. But 4, the pressure was crazy. So she had amazing neutral, very difficult to punish, weird hurt boxes, healing, just crazy mix-ups that were results of wonky things that felt unearned in a lot of ways. And Elena was just not a fun character to have to deal with, and a black eye on the game that just never got fixed because I think they didn't, the development was over with. But
John, what's your favorite Street Fighter game again? I'm are you sure? You sure you don't want to revise your testimony here? I've been playing a lot of Phoenix Ace Attorney games. You sure you don't want to just check it. So anyway, yeah, it's these are our beloved games in this franchise have plenty of problems, and it's okay. Like and we want to document these problems. We want to talk about them because when these future games come out, it's like, hey, don't have the same problems here. Like, make your games better. Don't do this stuff again.